One of the topics that has sparked debate among Muslims is a celebration of birthdays. Many scholars believe that celebrating birthdays is haram or even shirk, and here's why. 1. No basis in Islam. In Islam, the teachings of the Qur'an and the Hadith are the primary sources of guidance for Muslims. These texts provide clear instructions on how to live a life that is pleasing to Allah. When it comes to the celebration of birthdays, there is no evidence in the Qur'an or Hadith that supports this practice. This is an important point because in Islam, if something is not mentioned in these primary sources, especially in terms of worship or religious practices, it is often considered impermissible. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the best example for Muslims to follow. His life, actions, and sayings are carefully preserved in the Hadith, which serves as a guide for Muslims in every aspect of life. The Prophet was known for his wisdom and deep understanding of what was beneficial for his followers. If celebrating birthdays were a good practice or encouraged in Islam, the Prophet would have surely done it, and his companions would have followed his example. However, there is no record of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ever celebrating his own birthdays or the birthdays of his family and companions. This absence of any celebration of birthdays in the life of the Prophet Muhammad is significant. It suggests that birthdays are not an important or necessary part of Islamic practice. In fact, in Islam, there are specific occasions that are meant to be celebrated, such as the two Eids, which are based on significant religious events and are observed with particular rituals and prayers. These celebrations are rooted in the teachings of the Prophet and have clear guidelines in the Qur'an and Hadith. In contrast, birthdays do not have any such religious significance in Islam. They're not linked to any religious events or acts of worship. Because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not celebrate birthdays, many scholars argue that this is a sign that such celebrations should not be part of Islamic practice. In Islam, the actions of the Prophet are considered to be the best example for Muslims to follow. This is because the Prophet was guided by Allah in everything he did, and his practices reflect what is most pleasing to Allah. Anything that was not practiced by the Prophet, especially in terms of worship or religious practices, is generally considered impermissible. This is based on the principle that Islam is a complete and perfect way of life, and there is no need to add anything new to it. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned against introducing new practices into the religion, as this could lead to misguidance and deviation from the true teachings of Islam. Number 2, innovation, bid'ah in religion. In Islam, bid'ah or innovation in religious matters is a critical concept that Muslims are strongly advised to avoid. The term bid'ah refers to any newly introduced practice in the religion that was not established by the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. Since Islam is a complete and perfect way of life, Muslims believe that nothing new should be added to its teachings or practices. Celebrating birthdays is one such practice that many scholars consider to be bid'ah because it was not part of the original teachings of Islam. Bid'ah is considered dangerous because it can lead Muslims away from the pure teachings of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned against innovation in religion, saying, "Every newly invented matter is an innovation, and every innovation is misguidance, and every misguidance is in the hellfire." This hadith clearly indicates that adding new practices to the religion is not only discouraged, but also leads to misguidance and can result in severe consequences in the afterlife. Islam teaches that the religion was completed and perfected during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Allah says in the Qur'an, "This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and have approved for you Islam as religion." This verse signifies that nothing further is needed to complete the religion, and any attempt to introduce new practices or rituals is seen as undermining the completeness of Islam. The Sunnah, which includes the sayings, actions, and approvals of the Prophet Muhammad, is the second most important source of guidance for Muslims after the Qur'an. The Sunnah provides detailed explanations and examples of how to live according to the teachings of Islam. By following the Sunnah, Muslims ensure that their practices are in line with what was prescribed by the Prophet. When it comes to religious practices, the Prophet Muhammad is the best example to follow. He did not celebrate his birthday, nor did he encourage his followers to celebrate theirs. If birthday celebrations were a good or beneficial practice, the Prophet would have done it, and his companions would have followed suit. Since this practice was not part of the Prophet's life or the lives of his companions, many scholars argue that it should not be introduced into the religion. The practice of celebrating birthdays is not originally Islamic, but rather stems from other cultures and religions. Historically, birthday celebrations were associated with pagan rituals and superstitions. For example, ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans celebrated the birthdays of their gods and leaders with rituals that were intended to ward off evil spirits or bring good fortune. Over time, these practices spread and became part of many cultures, including those in the West, where birthday celebrations are now a common social custom. When Muslims adopt practices from other cultures that have no basis in Islam, it can be seen as a form of bid'ah. The concern is that such practices may gradually alter the pure teachings of Islam, introducing elements that were never intended to be part of the religion. This is why scholars stress the importance of avoiding innovations, as they can lead to a dilution of Islamic principles over time. One of the main dangers of bid'ah is that it can lead to the introduction of practices that contradict the core teachings of Islam. When new practices are introduced, there is a risk that they may overshadow or even replace authentic Islamic practices. This can result in Muslims prioritizing cultural or social customs over the religious obligations and teachings that have been clearly outlined in the Qur'an and Sunnah. For example, if Muslims start to place too much importance on celebrating birthdays, they might begin to neglect more significant Islamic practices, such as fasting on the days that the Prophet Muhammad recommended, or celebrating the two Eids, which are the official Islamic holidays. The introduction of birthdays as a celebration could lead to a shift in focus from these religious practices to a custom that has no basis in Islam. Furthermore, bid'ah can create divisions within the Muslim community. When some Muslims adopt new practices and others reject them, it can lead to disagreements and disunity. Unity among Muslims is highly valued in Islam, and anything that causes division is discouraged. By avoiding bid'ah, Muslims can maintain the unity and purity of their religion. In Islam, every act of worship must be based on clear evidence from the Qur'an and Sunnah. This principle ensures that Muslims only engage in practices that have been prescribed by Allah and His Messenger. When it comes to worship, anything that lacks a basis in these primary sources is considered invalid. Celebrating birthdays is not rooted in any form of worship prescribed in Islam. It is a social custom that has been adopted from other cultures, and it was not recommended or practiced by the Prophet Muhammad. Introducing birthdays as a form of celebration or ritual in Islam could be seen as an attempt to create a new form of worship that was not established by the Prophet, which is a clear example of bid'ah. Muslims are encouraged to be cautious about their acts of worship and to ensure that everything they do is in accordance with Islam's teachings. This caution helps to preserve the integrity of the religion and prevents the introduction of practices that could lead Muslims astray. Islamic scholars play a crucial role in guiding the Muslim community and ensuring that the teachings of Islam are preserved in their original form. Scholars are responsible for studying the Qur'an and Sunnah and providing rulings on what is permissible and what is not. When it comes to bid'ah, scholars have been clear in their warnings against introducing new practices into the religion. Many scholars have issued fatwas, religious rulings, stating that celebrating birthdays is haram because it constitutes to bid'ah. These scholars emphasize the importance of adhering strictly to the teachings of the Qur'an and Sunnah and avoiding any practices that were not established by the Prophet Muhammad. By following the guidance of scholars, Muslims can protect themselves from falling into bid'ah and ensure that their worship is in line with the pure teachings of Islam. Throughout Islamic history, there have been instances where bid'ah has led to significant changes in religious practices. One of the most notable examples is the introduction of the Mawlid, or the celebration of the Prophet Muhammad's birthday, which is observed by some Muslim communities. The Mawlid was not celebrated by the Prophet or his companions, and its introduction is considered by many scholars to be a form of bidʿah. The celebration of the Mawlid has led to various practices that are not part of the original teachings of Islam, such as specific rituals, recitations, and even certain forms of worship that are not found in the Qur'an or Sunnah. This example illustrates how bid'ah can introduce new practices that may eventually become widespread and accepted, even though they were not part of the original religion. By avoiding bid'ah, Muslims can prevent the introduction of practices that might alter the pure teachings of Islam and ensure that their worship remains in line with what Allah and His Messenger have prescribed. To avoid falling into bid'ah, Muslims should focus on following the Qur'an and Sunnah closely. This means seeking knowledge about the religion, understanding the practices that were established by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and being cautious about adopting new customs or traditions that have no basis in Islam. Muslims are also encouraged to seek guidance from knowledgeable scholars who can provide clarity on what is permissible and what is not. When in doubt, it is always safer to avoid practices that might be considered bid'ah and instead focus on what is clearly prescribed in the Qur'an and Sunnah. Number 3, imitating non-Muslims. One of the key reasons scholars argue that celebrating birthday is haram is because it involves imitating non-Muslims. Islam places great emphasis on maintaining a distinct identity for Muslims. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever imitates a people is one of them." Celebrating birthdays is a tradition that has its roots in non-Islamic cultures and religions. By adopting this practice, Muslims might inadvertently be copying customs that have no place in Islamic teachings. Number 4, potential for shirk. One of the most significant concerns in Islam regarding the celebrations of birthdays is the potential for it to lead to shirk, which is the gravest sin in Islam. Shirk, in Islamic terms, refers to associating partners with Allah or elevating someone or something to a divine status. It is a sin so severe that is considered unforgivable if a person dies without repenting from it. The Qur'an explicitly warns against shirk, stating, "Indeed, Allah does not forgive association with Him, but He forgives what is less than that for whom He wills." Given the seriousness of the sin, anything that could lead to shirk is a matter of deep concern for Muslims. In Islam, Tawheed, or the oneness of Allah, is the foundation of the faith. It emphasizes that Allah is the sole creator, sustainer, and ruler of the universe, and that no one and nothing else share His divine attributes. Shirk directly contradicts this principle by attributing divine powers or status to others besides Allah. This could involve worshiping other deities, believing in the power of objects or rituals to influence one's fate, or even elevating individuals to a status that rivals that of Allah. Shirk can manifest in many forms, ranging from clear acts of idol worship or more subtle practices that may not seem problematic at first glance. This is why Muslims are advised to be vigilant in avoiding any action or belief that could lead to shirk. The dangers of shirk is not just that it contradicts Islam's core beliefs, but also that it can gradually lead a person away from true faith, causing them to rely on things other than Allah for their needs and desires. Birthday celebrations, though seemingly innocent, can sometimes involve practices that border on shirk. In many cultures, birthdays are associated with certain rituals or customs that are believed to bring good luck, fortune, or protection from harm. For example, some people believe that lighting candles on a birthday cake and making a wish can bring about the fulfillment of that wish. Others might place special importance on receiving certain gifts or performing particular actions on their birthday, believing that these will bring them success or happiness in the coming year. While these practices might be viewed as mere traditions or superstitions, they can lead to a subtle form of By attributing power to objects, rituals, or even specific days, individuals may unknowingly be placing their trust in something other than Allah. Islam teaches that only Allah has control over our lives, and relying on anything else, especially in the context of a celebration like a birthday, can divert a person's faith from Allah to these other elements. This diversion, even if unintentionally, can gradually weaken a person's belief in Tawheed and open the door to shirk. The concern of shirk and birthday celebrations is further amplified by the fact that these celebrations are often influenced by non-Islamic cultures. Many birthday customs and traditions have roots in pagan practices or superstitions. For example, the practice of making a wish and blowing out candles is believed to have originated from ancient rituals intended to ward off evil spirits. These practices were not based on any divine guidance, but were rather superstitions developed by the people over time. When Muslims adopt such practices, even as part of a modern secular celebration, they may be inadvertently embracing elements of shirk. This is particularly problematic because it can lead to the gradual incorporation of non-Islamic beliefs and practices into a Muslim's life. Over time, this can erode the purity of their faith and lead them away from the strict monotheism that Islam teaches. Islam emphasizes the importance of Tawheed, not just as a theological concept, but as a guiding principle in everyday life. Muslims are encouraged to turn to Allah in all matters, big or small, and to avoid any form of reliance on things that could distract from their faith in Allah's power and control. This includes avoiding superstitions, rituals, or customs that suggest that anything other than Allah can influence their lives. In the context of birthdays, this means recognizing that no special day, ritual, or object has the power to change one's fate. Celebrations can involve such beliefs or practices are not just harmless traditions, but can be spiritually harmful if they lead a person to place their trust in something other than Allah. This is why scholars caution against celebrating birthdays in a way that could open the door to shirk. Number 5. Waste of time and resources. Islam teaches Muslims to be mindful of how they spend their time and resources. Celebrating birthdays often involves spending money on parties, gifts, and other activities that may not have any real benefit. Islam encourages spending in the way of Allah, such as giving to charity, helping those in need, or supporting family members. Instead of spending money on a birthday celebration, a Muslim could use that money for a more meaningful purpose, like helping someone in need or contributing to a good cause. Number 6. Focus on dunya, worldly life. One of the concerns about celebrating birthdays in Islam is that these events often shift the focus towards the dunya, or worldly life, rather than the hereafter, which is the ultimate goal for every Muslim. The dunya refers to the temporary material aspect of our existence on earth, while the hereafter is the eternal life that begins after death. Islam teaches that while we live in this world, our true purpose is to worship Allah and prepare for the life to come. When the focus of our actions shifts too much towards worldly concerns, it can distract us from the primary goal. Islam emphasizes that life in this world is temporary and fleeting. The Qur'an reminds us of this in several verses, such as, "The life of this world is only the enjoyment of deception," and "Know that the life of this world is but amusement and diversion, and adornment and boasting to one another and competition in increase of wealth and children." These verses serve as a reminder that while we are in this world, we should not become too attached to its pleasures, for they are not lasting. Birthdays, however, often center around celebrating worldly achievements, such as growing older, acquiring gifts, or being the center of attention. These aspects of birthday celebrations can lead to an increased attachment to the dunya. When a person's focus is primarily on enjoying these temporary pleasures, it can detract from their awareness of the ultimate reality of the hereafter. Another issue with birthdays is that they can lead to self-glorification. Birthdays often involve the individual being celebrated as the focal point, receiving gifts, praise, and attention from others. This can lead to feelings of pride and a desire for recognition. which are contrary to the values of humility and modesty that Islam promotes. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was known for his humility, and he taught Muslims to avoid seeking attention or elevating themselves above others. Islam teaches that all praise and glory belong to Allah alone. When individuals celebrate their birthdays and focus on their achievements or attributes, they may inadvertently be glorifying themselves rather than acknowledging that all blessings and successes come from Allah. This shift in focus can weaken a person's sense of humility and lead them to forget the importance of giving thanks to Allah for everything they have. Humility and modesty are key virtues in Islam. Muslims are encouraged to live modest lives, avoiding excess and extravagance. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Indeed, Allah has revealed to me that you should adopt humility so that no one oppresses another." This hadith highlights the importance of being humble in all aspects of life, including how we celebrate and recognize milestones. Birthday celebrations, especially those that involve extravagant parties, expensive gifts, and lavish attention, can go against the principles of humility and modesty. Instead of focusing on these worldly aspects, Islam teaches us to be grateful for each day Allah grants us, and to use our time wisely in preparing for the hereafter. Modesty in our celebrations and in our daily lives help us stay grounded and remind us of the temporary nature of the dunya. Islam teaches that the hereafter should always be at the forefront of a Muslim's mind. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Be in this world as if you were a stranger or a traveler." This hadith encourages Muslims to view their time in this world as a temporary and to focus on their ultimate destination, which is the hereafter. When celebrations like birthdays draw too much attention to the dunya, they can distract from this goal. Instead of focusing on worldly achievements or personal milestones, Muslims are encouraged to reflect on their relationship with Allah and how they can improve their deeds and preparation for the hereafter. Rather than celebrating birthdays with a focus on themselves, Muslims can instead use the occasion to reflect on their past year, seek forgiveness for any shortcomings, and renew their commitment to living a life that pleases Allah. Ultimately, the purpose of life in Islam is to worship Allah and to seek His pleasure. The Qur'an states, "And I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me." This verse underscores the idea that everything we should do be oriented towards fulfilling our purpose of worshiping Allah. When Muslims allow worldly celebrations like birthdays to dominate their focus, they may inadvertently shift away from this purpose. By minimizing the emphasis on worldly celebrations and instead focusing on actions that please Allah, Muslims can maintain a balance that keeps them oriented towards the hereafter. Acts of worship, charity, kindness to others, and personal reflection are all ways that Muslims can focus on their spiritual growth rather than becoming overly attached to the temporary pleasures of the dunya. 7. The concept of time in Islam. Islam has its own way of marking time in significant events. For instance, Muslims are encouraged to fast on Mondays and Thursdays because the Prophet Muhammad used to fast on these days. Muslims also celebrate the two Eids, which are significant Islamic holidays. These are the times that Muslims are encouraged to celebrate as they have a clear basis in the Sunnah and are connected to worship and remembrance of Allah. Celebrating birthdays, which are based on the solar calendar and not on any Islamic significance, doesn't align with the Islamic concept of time and celebration. Number 8. Pride and arrogance. Celebrating birthdays can sometimes lead to pride and arrogance, especially when people start comparing their celebrations with others. In Islam, pride and arrogance are traits that are highly discouraged. The Prophet Muhammad said, "He who has in his heart the weight of a mustard seed of pride shall not enter paradise." Celebrations that promote self-importance or competition are contrary to the teachings of Islam, which emphasize humility and gratitude to Allah. Number 9. Thankfulness to Allah. In Islam, it is important to be thankful to Allah for the blessings He has given us, including our life and health. However, this thankfulness should not be expressed in ways that are not part of Islamic teachings. Instead of celebrating birthdays, Muslims are encouraged to regularly thank Allah, pray for a long and righteous life, and engage in good deeds. the best way to express gratitude for life is by living it in accordance with Islamic principles and making the most of every moment by doing good. Number 10. Alternative ways to celebrate. While birthday themselves may not be encouraged, Islam does offer other ways to mark the passage of time and to be thankful for life. For instance, Muslims can celebrate their Islamic birthdays, which are based on the lunar calendar and have more spiritual significance. On these days, instead of having a party, a Muslim could spend time in prayer, give charity, or do something beneficial for others. This aligns more with the Islamic values of humility, charity, and gratitude. The practice of celebrating birthdays is considered haram by many scholars because it involves imitating non-Muslims. Islam places great emphasis on maintaining a distinct identity for Muslims. And the Prophet Muhammad warned against imitating the practices of other cultures and religions. By adopting customs like birthday celebrations, Muslims might inadvertently be copying traditions that have no place in Islamic teachings and that could lead to a weakening of faith and a loss of cultural and religious identity. To preserve their faith and maintain a clear distinction between Islamic and non-Islamic practices, Muslims are encouraged to focus on the teaching of the Qur'an and Sunnah and to avoid practices that have no basis in Islam.